Yeah. Oh, we've got our ladies here and Paul, so, yeah. Just going to move in the first instance, 13, review of the Community Occupancy Guidelines 2012 terms of reference. So I have Nancy and Paul. So you need a second. Councillor Simpson. No, it's just put it there initially, then open it up for comment. All yours.
I've actually got a short presentation prepared.
Yep, got a PowerPoint.
Okay, so my presentation will only take a few minutes. It will cover some background about community leases, the driver and purpose of the review, and key timeline and deliverables. Okay. Oh. Okay. So the first slide provides some background about community leases. Auckland Council currently has over 1,400 community leases to achieve a wide range of outcomes. Most leases were granted by legacy councils. Only 10% were granted in the last 5 years. In 2012, Council introduced the Community Occupancy Guidelines to support decision making. Local boards make final decisions and have discretion to consider applications on a case-by-case basis. So the report in front of you is seeking approval of terms of reference for a review of the Community Occupancy Guidelines. It's timely to conduct the review because the guidelines been around for 5 years. Leases are also the common denominator for a range of projects that we're currently undertaking, and are particularly relevant to sports facilities investment plan, golf facilities investment plan, and the facility partnership policy projects. They are a major piece of the jigsaw puzzle because they are a key instrument Council uses to invest in the delivery of outcomes. They're also a major way to Council partners with community organizations, and also often significant Council assets are locked for a period of time and sometimes for exclusive use. The review has a few objectives. It aims to assist Auckland Council to deliver the best outcomes for Auckland through community leases. An example of what it might look like in practice is to ensure the activities, services or programs happen at council properties serve community needs and contribute to local board plans and strategic outcomes. The review will also help ensure the guidelines are fit for purpose and robust. A test of it is to see whether the guidelines are working well, not just for decision makers, but also for leaseholders and communities, and are adaptable to local contexts. The review will also improve consistency and transparency. An example will be to increase visibility of the outcomes delivered and having a consistent approach to granting and determining terms and conditions of the new leases. The last slide's got a table that gives you an idea of the timeline and key deliverables. So the review will be conducted in 2 stages. The first stage will have a look at how the guidelines being applied in practice. So that means having a look at the advice given to local boards, the terms and conditions of new leases, and any reported impact. Stage 2, we will evaluate the guidelines against good practice criteria to see whether they are fit for purpose. We'll also draw on the findings of the facility partnership project, and we'll conduct surveys and interviews to understand the issues from a leaseholder's perspective. We will share the results of our review with key stakeholders and local boards before seeking final approval on any changes to the guidelines. Thank you. That's the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Nancy. And don't forget, this is the terms of reference for the review. It's going to come back to us once the review is done, as outlined by Nancy. So are there any questions? Councillor Casey?
The first stage is a desktop exercise, right?
That's right.
I understood that. We've just been through a similar exercise with the Wrong Authority, which has been really good. I've really enjoyed the way that the leases have been assessed on a case-by-case basis. But my issue is that the desktop exercise will throw up some anomalies that you won't be able to test, like bar profit, whereas if you're just looking at a balance sheet, there are things in there that you won't be able to kind of delve into. And my interest in particular would be about gambling and alcohol use on our facilities. And I'm not sure that that first stage will capture that at all.
It's not something we've specifically included in the terms of reference. So no, it was more about the application of the existing occupancy guidelines.
I understand that, but my particular interest is in that, and it will come up at some stage, probably in stage 2. But the other issue that came up at Wrong Authority was subleasing, known or unknown to council. And again, your desktop exercise will not throw that up. So that it's the second stage that will throw that up. Can you just advise me, tell me about the next stage? You go to the local boards, and after the desktop exercise, when do you delve into issues that would be thrown up by the desktop? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so the desktop analysis will look at the terms of reference and also any reported revenue and any community benefits. So maybe some of the gamblings and also subleasing issues will come out of there. And in the second stage, when we go out and survey and do targeted interview with the leaseholder, because hopefully that's where the richness of the story will come out.
My last comment was simply about, while we're doing the governance framework review and reviewing the delegations to boards, this one kind of looks like the alternative to that. Like we're coming in, it's just I'm asking you to be very careful about the big hand of the governing body coming down on the boards, because this has been their patch and we're coming over the top of them. So it's just that I saw the words, or in the report it says that we're going to consult with the boards about our revised guidelines, whereas, shouldn't the boards be coming in earlier?
I think through the chair, in terms of the information that we gather through that desktop exercise, that will then inform some of the discussions that we have with the local board in terms of how they've applied on a particular case-by-case basis the particular lease agreements. So we'll look at all of the data first. That will lead to a whole series of questions, so we get a richer story in terms of, well, on what basis did you make those discussions, which then flows into the stage 2 bit, which will then be how do we take those guidelines and ensure that they're fit for purpose.
I get that, but if you're a local board who hasn't been doing things particularly well or according to our grand plan, then you're in the back seat on this, and we're coming in to tell you how to do it better. It's just I have a
I think there's an intermediary stage between looking at the leases and then having a discussion in terms of how they were applied at a local board level, understanding the thinking of the local board at that time. So then we wrap up that aspect in terms of what the current state is, and present an analysis back, a summary of findings back to the committee. So we wrap that up in a package, and then we look at the future state.
Through the chair, just an additional answer as well is to remember that this is outcomes focused. So yes, the review might bring up some questions about the application, but actually the real question should be, did that application affect the outcomes that we are achieving? So this is mostly about, are leases serving the multiple purposes they're meant to be serving? And are the guidelines serving them to achieve those outcomes? So I think we will all have to look at the review findings and keep focused on outcomes and what outcomes we are trying to achieve, not so much about is perfect process being followed.
But you can see how there could be a mismatch.
I could see how people might perceive there could be policy creep, but they are not a policy, they are a guideline. So they're a guideline about the best way to achieve outcomes.
Councillor Walker.
Yeah, got a few questions about the terms of reference and the suggestion that I'd put that the terms of reference need to be expanded. The first issue is around the relationship between community leases and management plans, because many reserves have management plans. Often those management plans as they stand now haven't been revisited for years, sometimes decades, literally decades. So it would be useful to have the terms of reference looking at the relationship with management plans. I'd suggest that's fairly critical.
So,
The other concern that I would suggest around the terms of reference and the scope is the relationship between existing circumstances and the situation going forward around reserves that are becoming available. And the background to that question is what we've got is a huge difference between the reserves that we have been used to in existing areas relative to the reserves that are coming on stream in new areas. There's a huge discrepancy because the amount of reserve space that we're getting now is pitiful, maybe 2% compared to 7.5% historically. So it would be useful to have some commentary or some widening of the scope to look at the dilemma that we have going forward between these new areas and existing areas.
and how many other questions? So
And
because they're noting them.
the other question I've got that just goes to terms of reference and scope is, as much and all as in your terms of reference you might be communicating with a particular group that has a lease, it may well be that there are other groups in the community have effectively been shut out through that lease. So those groups might have an interest in this process. They might have some very good commentary going forward that you might not otherwise pick up through the terms of reference that you've got currently. So my question around that, is there an opportunity to widen the terms of reference and the scope so that you capture those circumstances? And I could give you a number of examples.
No, not yet. So,
I'm not doing that.
oh, okay.
My other question that just goes to terms of reference and scope is around the necessity to include some specific examples when you come back, because otherwise often we don't pick up what's actually going on. And I would suggest that this is a pretty significant issue as it affects our communities going forward. And then the last question I would have that goes to terms of reference and scope is the relationship with funding going forward that many of these groups have. We've got a constrained funding envelope, and that is very significant.
So there's Nancy, Paul, Kataraina, there's about 5 questions. So, Kataraina.
Through the chair, might we suggest that we take Councillor Casey's comments and make sure that within the scope we are specifically looking for what subleases may or may not be occurring, what associated gambling activities or alcoholic beverages may be sold on site. So we will keep very aware of those during the desktop so that we can have a deeper look. And also the large range of matters you have raised, we will make sure that in the terms of reference we expand the scope so we can see a relationship with a range of things, including, you know, whether people who don't have a lease feel like the leasing process is transparent, that they have access to it, many of the issues you raised. If we make those additions and get the additions approved through the chair of the committee, would that be satisfactory to committee members?
Yeah, look, that'll be good. and I don't think it needs, doesn't need a recommendation. I'll take it as given that it'll go through the chair. So look, thank you.
And through you, Mr. Chair, if it's possible for the chair to perhaps consult with councillors, myself for example, that might be interested. This is a particularly significant and I would suggest a very, very sensitive issue for many, many groups.
Sorry, so Councillor Walker, that's no issue at all.
Thank you.
And I mean, and the fact that your questions plus Councillor Casey's and any others that come through, that's obviously been noted already, and it'll come back to the person who've asked them. So look, thank you.
Through the chair, just to make sure we heard your issues correctly, we will type them up and check them with you before we send them to the chair. Otherwise, you had quite a long list, so we just want to make sure we get all of it.
I did write them down.
Oh, fantastic.
But
So-
we can confirm.
So Katarina and Paul and Nancy, I mean, I know others have sort of used drop-in sort of sessions for people. So I mean, that's just another option that Tam whispered in my ear, which is a good one. So look, it just gives us the ability, those councillors that wish to come into a drop-in session. Okay, so I've got Matua Wilcox and then Councillor Watson, and I'm hoping, Ann Simpson, and then I'm hoping to put the recommendation.
Yes, Chair. So, was there any engagement with the IMSBE or like two members of this committee? Sorry, I might be suffering a senior moment here or just a lost cause, but I'm just wondering, was there any discussion with us or with the IMSBE?
No, there was not.
So my question is, we see this as derived through our 85.1 kaupapa, section 85.1. So, you know, I'm looking at the impact report and there's been no engagement at all with Māori, and specifically in this case the IMSB. With regards to this terms of reference, so when would that have occurred, or when will it be occurring, or are we waiting now for the drop-in session? Because I think, you know, this is an 85.1 issue.
Katarina.
So generally we don't consult on scopes for projects. We consult in the review stage. So this committee might decide that this review does not go ahead. So generally we don't consult on scopes for work.
So this is the terms of reference for a review to happen. I mean, stage 2, and who knows what happens with the desktop exercise. It may then come through and say, hey, look, there's some issues here that may and possibly reflect on our Māori community. And I think, but this is the terms of reference for the review to take place. So stage 2 may be the stage.
Will it be? I'm asking. I'm
I-
asking the question. You know, when does the IMSB get involved?
We can, of course, like with any project, we ask the IMSB staff whether they want to be involved. They don't always choose to be, but we have not as a practice done it for scopes.
No, I suppose I'm saying once you've done this review, because it's only a desktop, you're just looking at a computer and basically crunching all the numbers together. Where I'm coming from is, so when you've got that, where do we go from there? That's the crunch, because, you know, there's a heap of reviews
So
sitting
we
in filing
can talk
cabinets.
to Brandy and her staff about how they might want to be involved in the review process.
Yeah.
In the review process, not the terms of reference for the review.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I just have
Well, hold on.
a question relative to that.
Well, hold on. I'll just let this particular question answer session finish first. So, you know, I mean, Katarina, look, for me, it seems quite clear that the Independent Māori Statutory Board will be involved in the process. But this is for the terms of reference for the review that will take place, albeit the desktop. So, I mean, they will be involved.
I mean, if they choose to, through the chair, there is not a million IMSB staff. They prioritise what projects they choose to give their input on.
Yeah, the staff do, but I do, and I will.
And you're sitting here at this committee table as a decision maker when the review recommendations come back.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'd just like to make sure that we're covering off all bases.
Oh, yep, been covered. Now, I don't know whether we've sorted this part out. Is
Well,
this?
I just had a question about that issue.
I know. I've
And,
got three.
and, I mean, my understanding is that the IMSB has members at this committee. They're no different to the rest of us in terms of raising issues and engagement. And I would have thought that the timely distribution of the agenda would have covered the base.
Okay, Councillor Watson.
Thanks. Just a quick question about the potential risks and mitigation that have been identified in the report, particularly as it goes to the, perhaps the expectation that this is about, rent increases, or, that the end product of the outcome will be, increasing rents or fixing anomalies. Isn't that in effect going to be the outcome really when it's all said and done, and it is going to be very hard to really give comfort over that risk to people that may or may not be involved in the review?
Through the chair, so the clear purpose of the review is not to look specifically at rents. It is to review the fit for purpose of the guidelines. So that means that it will depend on what comes through, what we find through the desktop analysis and discussion, but it's not a clear set purpose. But that doesn't mean it might not come through. At this point, we don't know what issues might come through, but I suppose I'd reassure you that if the rates of the lease charges come up, then that will be related to outcomes. So we will be looking at what revenue we're collecting from that relevant to what outcomes are being achieved. So the only reason that would come up negatively would be if we have very low rents and we're finding it very difficult to find the community benefit or community outcome. And I assume if that is occurring quite a bit, you would like to know that, and then you would have the option to reassess how you might like to go forward with that.
Okay, Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a kind of a simple question, I'm hoping. Look, community leases are a local board delegation,
Yep.
right? So I'd like to think that the reason that we are reviewing the occupancy guidelines is because through the various local boards they think there may be an issue. Because I don't want to play, just to sort of almost highlight a point that Councillor Casey made, the big brother attitude of coming on down, which is something, is a local board issue. And to that end, what I want to know is, regardless of the review, what is a guideline and what is actual? They don't have to follow any guideline, do they? So we're basically doing a review that could have no impact, because at the end of the day, it's the local board decision to do what they want to do. So therefore, it's going to take a lot of your time for, is it 9 months? 4 months? 4 months. But at the end of the day, local boards can still do what they like. So can you highlight why you're doing it again? I mean, what you really need is that local board buy-in, so those guidelines are so good from their perspective that they're not guidelines, they're actually policy. That's the anomaly I'm struggling with. I'm struggling with a whole lot of work being done to something that literally can't be implemented because it's not a decision that we make.
I suppose the second part answers your question, which is, are guidelines appropriate? Are they fit for purpose? Is there another mechanism that also might be required?
That's where you think you're going to.
It's a two-part. We won't make assumptions about where we're going to. They may all be brilliant and everything's working just fine, and no changes might be required.
Right.
We shouldn't be making assumptions about
No, but you've asked
practice.
to do it, so that makes me...
Yeah. It is difficult to provide some of the advice we need to provide to you on a range of matters, given that we don't understand what's going on in leases and what the collective impact sometimes that might have on networks. So we don't understand actually what decisions and what community outcomes are being achieved. So that is an issue as well.
And you've got the feedback from local boards that maybe it needs to be reviewed.
Through the chair, we have had feedback from local boards, and one particular local board has passed a resolution specifically looking at their own policy for occupancy guidelines, and that was Albert Eden.
Okay. Councillor Cooper, and then hopefully we can...
Thank you. I suppose it is interesting. I'm a bit concerned because the thing is, if we start having individual guidelines for every single board, there's no consistency across the area, and just had one example of some sort of policy being implemented in one of my local boards which alarmed most of the community, but local board said they could do it. I know it's going to be a paper thing, but I was at a local board meeting a few months ago and I watched the process around the staff trying to get a long lapsed lease, some years, actually renewed. And the local board were like, no, and they kept sending it back and sending it back. And this group had no certainty of tenure. It was really interesting. And so I imagine that a lot of your staff have a lot of experiences that they could verbally give you that might also help shape this, which never comes out on paper. I mean, I was personally appalled at the way it went down, but because this group was still left with no certainty, and they had put huge amounts of money into developing our facility, which, of course, when the lease is up, they don't get to keep that. You know, there was a lot of good faith, and that good faith seemed to me to be a bit, you know, disregarded. So I think that, you know, I really believe the whole reason, whether we like it or not, that we had an amalgamation was to get consistency for people. Yes, we've got to, we must have local views taken into account, but I think each local board, you know, you could have every election it changes because of the different ideology or views of each local board rather than what the community wants, and that's what concerns me about having many different policies. And I think it is important to, you know, people can live on a boundary and they can be leasing one in one area and another, and there's a whole big different set of rules, and we already fell into that trap around the dog rules, which we're now having to review. So I just hope that when we get this back, that we are able to sort of, as a committee, put some sort of consistency so the public can have some confidence, you know, and not be sort of pushed around every 3 or 6 years when a board changes. So because a lot of these leases are longer than that. And yeah, so I would hope that you can also talk to your staff that are on the front line at these local board meetings, as well as just the paper. Maybe be able to ask them, okay, what are your experiences? And some I'm sure will be fantastic, but we just need to show sometimes what's working well, what's not working well, and just on paper doesn't always tell the story.
Okay. Katarina, can you get back to the committee in regards to the drop-in sessions when the staff are ready, please?
Yes.
Okay. It's been moved and second. I'll put the recommendations. All those in favour? Thanks, carried. Okay. Item 14. And look, before we get to this, I just want to clarify one thing. This particular committee meeting was put in here, and so we're not running behind time. First, Finance and Performance actually put their meeting tagged onto it. So once we finish this committee, we will move into the Finance and Performance workshop. But once we finish this,